Tuning in to another Redline Solutions educational video. This session covers the future-proofing of your produce operations and was recorded on 9th of December 2015. Today's session will be presented by our very own CEO Todd Baggett. And here is today's agenda. Let me pass you on to Todd.
America, the red dots that you're seeing there are actually our office locations here. We currently have over 175 customer installations and are tracking well over 500 million cartons per year. And I am an active participant in the PTI leadership. I'm actually co-chair of the technology working group that worked to revise a lot of those PTI standards several years ago. One of the things that really makes us unique is that we're a complete solutions provider. So that means not just the software, but the software, the hardware, the support, the system deployments, and the training. We were honored in 2014 by Frost & Sullivan as their North American Fresh Produce Traceability Partner of the Year. If you'd like more details on that, you can certainly visit our website and through on the image that looks just like this. So now, just a quick overview. Redline provides inventory and traceability software. We really service the grower-shipper community as well as distribution, so really kind of the supply side. We provide the PTI case labels, pallet tags, all of the software, and I'm excited to tell you that we now have both on-premise and web-based options for you. We have a great technical support team, and one of the nice things about having a single source for the software and the hardware is that we can actually manage all of the services around the hardware, warranty, contract, repairs, all of those things for you. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into a little bit more on what we're doing. Just a quick overview here on the products that are in-premise are all the ones that have gray in the logo, and then we'll talk briefly about myproduce.com, which we announced at Fresh Summit in Atlanta. So let's jump into our topic for today and start looking at some of the shifts that are occurring in the fresh produce industry. The food safety and traceability movement is underway. There's no question about that. And it really, for the produce side, started with the PTI, or the Produce Traceability Initiative, which is really for retail and food service companies are now starting to request the case label traceability. We also look at one of the drivers being food safety regulation. Here in the U.S., we have the Food Safety Modernization Act, also known as FSMA, and just in north of the border in Canada, they have the Safe Food for Canadians Act, and we'll go into those in a little bit more detail later. One of the things I always like to say is that in the circus of food production, food safety is really the high wire act, and traceability is the safety net. And by that, what I mean is that the real science here is in the food safety, and as you look at the deployment of FSMA, what you see there is a lot of emphasis on the prevention instead of the after the fact catching of the item that's had a problem. The real challenge here is that we need to get our food safety where it reduces the chances of having any issues, but traceability will always be that safety net that when there is a problem allows us to identify where that problem occurred, isolate it, and take that out of commerce. So let's kind of compare the two a little bit, food safety versus traceability. If you look at food safety, it's really about hazard analysis and critical control points, HACCP, or if you look at HARPC, it's about taking that information about what your risks are and defining how you're going to control those. What are you going to do to monitor and prevent those risks from occurring? When we look at traceability, it's really about maintaining lot visibility through the whole supply chain. And really, if you think about it, one step forward and one step back is nothing new. In fact, it's been federally mandated in the U.S. since 2002 by the Bioterrorism Act. So this is something that we're all familiar with. And if we look at food safety, really, again, it's science-based. This is the how do you make sure things don't occur, and traceability is really more information-based. knowing where product is, where it went, and where it came from. In food safety, we have documented, measurable, and repeatable processes. This is how we ensure that we're doing each and every time the steps that we need to minimize risk. It also involves worker training and the execution of those plans to make sure that the risks are prevented. If we look at the traceability side of things, it really is unique in that it requires participation from each member of the supply chain. If you think of a supply chain and any one link in the middle that loses that information, loses all that information for the folks below them. And again, it involves worker training and execution, and what's unique here is that it's actually now through each of the members in those supply chains. At a very high level, food safety is proactive and traceability is the reactive element of that. So what exactly is traceability? There's different types of traceability, and probably the first one that we should look at here is forward traceability. And this is really what most of the grower shippers and distributors are looking at, which is where did they ship specific product lot numbers to? If there is an incident, how do they identify who those people are who received the product or the product was shipped to? And the back end of that is the backward traceability, which is really to identify what is the source and the source lot for every product or component if you have a food item that has multiple ingredients in it. And process traceability is something that's gotten a lot more visibility in the last couple years, which really has to do with what equipment was used, what bath was used to wash the cantaloupe or to dip the peaches or the nectarines as they go through. Which crews actually packed the product and what shift did that occur on. That's important because as we've seen over the last couple years is that there can be facility-induced risks. And the case of the Jensen Farms, we had the salmonella contamination actually got into the water bath, and that then contaminated the other items. We had an issue in California where there was a large packer of stone fruit who had problems, and they actually had to shut down the whole facility to do a cleaning top to bottom, and during the midst of their season they had to outsource a lot of that work. Again, facility related, ties back to process traceability. So ultimately traceability starts at the source and tracks the product through all of the stages of harvest, receipt, processing, packing, and shipping, ultimately to the place of sale, whether that is a restaurant, food service operation, or a retail store. So the benefits of traceability are pretty clear. First and foremost, the legal requirement from both FSMA and Safe Food for Canadians Act will be electronic records. You'll need to be able to get that information and transmit it in a very timely fashion. It's looking like that's going to be in the 24-hour time period. The other big benefit is that by having this information, it expedites the investigation, which ultimately leads to pulling the product that's affected faster and minimizing consumer sickness and death. The not so obvious benefit is that it actually protects the whole commodity from these guilty by association recalls that we've had in the past, where the entire commodity gets pulled out of commerce. Probably the first one that we saw of this nature was back in 2006 with the spinach problem where we had E. coli. There was not a clear indication of where that was coming from, and so a general warning was issued by the FDA, and anybody who was selling spinach stopped selling it, and that included the retailers as well as the food service operators and restaurants. The key here by having traceability is that you will be able to actually clear the grower's product that is not associated and keep it in commerce. And really, what we also have to look at here is, what is the messaging that we're sending out on this? Because if we are saying pull a whole commodity, like pull all the spinach or pull all the cucumbers, then what we're doing is we're actually damaging the growers who are not involved. We're damaging the consumer demand for that commodity, and ultimately it has a negative effect on the entire industry. What if instead we actually had a message that said, hey, instead of all spinach or all of any commodity, what we have to do is we have to identify this specific grower and these specific lot numbers. The commodity-wide recall reduces consumer confidence across the entire commodity, whereas a specific recall improves customer confidence by helping them see that the problem is specific to one grower or a few growers and some specific lot numbers. So what is driving the traceability movement? You know, probably one of the things that we've got to take a look at is back in 2011, the CDC reported that they estimate about 48 million Americans will get sick from foodborne illness each year, 128,000 of those requiring hospitalization and 3,000 dying. If we look at that, approximately 22% of that 48 million is associated with produce, and if we drill further down and look at the studies by the Alliance of Food and Farming, what we'll see is roughly 16% of that is associated with improper handling after leaving the farm. So that is, you know, the preparation, the storage, things that have happened outside the farm. What we're really looking at here is this roughly 6% that is associated with the growing, the packing, and the shipping of the fresh produce, and that's the approximate 2.9 million people per year who are being sickened that we're really focused on the produce traceability side. So according to Produce for Better Health Foundation, in 2014, the average American ate about 700 pounds of fruits and vegetables. I was really impressed by this because that number as short as 4 or 5 years ago was about 400 pounds. So definitely seeing consumption increase as we see the American consumers looking for a healthier lifestyle. That there's been a number of significant produce recalls over the last decade that are constantly eroding that consumer confidence. And really, if we look at these, there's two more than any that really cause a lot of effect in the marketplace. First of all, as I mentioned, the 2006 E. coli in spinach outbreak, and to me that was really the 9/11 of food safety for produce. All of a sudden after that we started seeing a lot of legislation being put forth by various state and federal legislators, and ultimately led to the foundation of the PTI, as the industry said, we've got to take care of this ourselves. As far as the second one that I highlighted, it's actually the U.S. Salmonella in peanut butter, the one below the one in 2008 and 2009. That particular one probably more than anything pushed the need for FSMA to the top and drove that home where we actually see FSMA got passed. And in that case, there were executives of U.S. Peanut Corporation who actually knew that there were tests that showed that there was salmonella and have said ship it anyway. I can tell you that the latest reports are those executives are serving time in federal penitentiary at this point. So how did the produce industry respond? As I mentioned, they formed the Produce Traceability Initiative, or commonly known as the PTI. It's a voluntary initiative that was created in 2007. It was formed by the leading growers, retailers, and produce trade associations, including the PMA, the CPMA, and United Fresh. And really the goal was to implement a more effective traceability system across the whole supply chain. If we look at what those requirements are, basically each case must have a label on it that includes some key pieces of information. The first of which is the Global Trade Identification Number, or GTIN, and that GTIN is something that identifies who the brand owner is and also what pack style that particular product is. The next critical piece of information is the lot or batch number, and this is what ties us back to the original source for that product, and whenever there's a recall, the lot or batch number is the key ingredient here to figure out what needs to come off the shelf. And then the last one here is this PTI voice pick code. And really this was initiated by the retailers because some of them said, hey, in our distribution centers, we're not using barcode systems to scan everything out. We're using voice systems. And they would have a headset on and the system would speak to them about where to go and what to pull. By creating this PTI voice pick code, we basically are taking the information from the G10 and the lot number, and we're combining them through a hash algorithm to come up with a significant 4 digits, of which the first two there, I think it's about 97% of the time, that's all you're going to need. If there's a unique combination of G10 and lot numbers that create a conflict, by getting to the full 4-digit number, you reduce the chance of duplication by 99.9%. The top label that you see there is kind of how the PTI case label was originally designed, and now what we're seeing is that the RPC label is becoming the standard. And that's what you're seeing here on the right. This is something that was initially introduced by Walmart and is required by Walmart on all cases or RPCs containing produce. It's also required by Safeway, Kroger, Loblaws, and a few others for RPCs only, and in their case, they're not currently using it as purely a traceability item. In fact, what they're doing is they're using it to manage their inventory in the back room of the store by having this pack date on it, particularly if you think of an RPC that does not have any printing on it showing who the supplier is or what the commodity is. This gives them a clear way to identify what the product is and also maintain their rotation by looking at those pack dates. This label is also preferred by Whole Foods and is in commerce today. Now, shifting our attention to the U.S. government response, January 4th, 2011, President Obama had signed the Food Safety Modernization Act to put it into law. It is the most sweeping change in U.S. food safety law in over 70 years, and it really shifted the focus from responding to food safety issues to preventing them, as I talked about a little bit earlier. The final regulations, 5 of which were issued here in 2015 with 2 more remaining in 2016, and the enforcement will be phased in over the next 1 to 4 years. I put a link down here at the bottom for the FDA site. The FDA, working with the PMA, United Fresh, and CPMA, is actually hosting several webinars, the first of which will be this Friday, the 11th, in which they will be going over some of the details to help us understand how they're going to be implementing FSMA and what they see as the next steps. Shifting over to the Canadian government response, November 22nd, 2012, the Safe Food for Canadians Act became law, and it really covers food production and food products that are imported, exported, or traded between provinces. So really the only thing that's not really covered there is something that is grown and exclusively used within one province. The focus is really stronger food safety rules, more effective inspections, the commitment to a high level of service, and more information ultimately for the consumers. And the planned enforcement for Safe Food for Canadians Act is over the next 2 years. So now let's shift our attention to how do you future-proof your produce operations. And let's start by looking at some of the challenges in the packing side of the house. Really, probably the biggest challenge is maintaining source lot traceability. Commingling of products is always a risk there, and the challenge is that if you commingle products, then the source lots involved in those commingled products are all part of the pack lot, which means if there's a problem with one particular lot number, but you also mixed in a second or a third lot number that did not get recorded, you may have product that has a problem out there and you're looking at the wrong source lots. One of the challenges as we see is unlabeled bins, and if you think of bins, which are a common storage method, totes as well, is most of the time as they're coming in, they're not being labeled and they're being stored together. And so the challenge with that is that it's hard to determine where one lot ended and where another lot began. I've also been through customer sites where they do use bin tags, and the challenge is at the end of the season, or as they get to the end of a room where they're clearing it out, they find some tags on the floor. And the challenge with that is that we can't have those items being accounted for in a different way. So the last part of this is really tracking by grower, not lot number. And while this is a practice that I see used, what really it comes down to is if you do have a food safety issue and you don't track by the grower lot number, what in essence you're saying is if there's an issue, everything from that grower from that season is probably suspect and subject to recall. The other challenge we run into is maintaining rotation to prevent waste. And this varies by commodities and shelf life of commodities and storage practices of commodities. But it goes from everything from a product that is highly perishable like a berry or spinach that literally may have to be in and out within a 2 to 3 day period to get from the West Coast to the East Coast or to make a long distance journey, to products like apples that may be put into a CA room and actually stored for a number of months before they're actually packed. But the key here is that if you don't maintain your rotation, you wind up either scrapping product or donating product instead of selling that product. And the last issue here is the case labeling. As people start looking at case labeling, they say, wow, this can be a difficult challenge. I have a lot of places where I'm labeling things now, and if I do that in an all-manual fashion and I've got any high-speed lines, it's going to be overwhelming. In fact, it may even be impossible. So if we take a look at this in the packing operations, what can you do to help future-proof your packing operations? One of those things is to automate the case labeling process. That allows you to track the source lot to the pack lot. It allows you to record the data in the electronic format, and on those high-speed lines allows you to print those labels, and then in value-add areas or lower-speed areas you can batch print those case labels. One of the challenges, it must be scalable because you've got both internal pack lines. As I said, you may have high-speed lines and value-add lines, and on top of that you may have contract packers who are packing for you in your brand that may or may not be shipping it to you before it goes to the customer. And then the last part of that is automating the receipt into the host system, which again, having an interface with the host system is an optional type of thing, but a lot of times people will see a benefit from that because they're storing all of their SKUs and their item numbers in the host system anyway, and they're generating the cases and creating pallets which they're recording in their inventory systems. So, one of the solutions that's out there that I wanted to just talk about briefly today is Redline Packing. It's part of our suite of inventory and traceability products, and it allows you to track both your source and pack lots, and it works in your existing processes instead of changing them. It's a single system that allows you to manage all of your locations, all of your lines, and all of your packing cells, whether that's all within one facility or that's spread out across multiple of your own facilities or a combination of your own and contract packing facilities. In the system, one of the key benefits is that we automate the labeling of the cases using a print and apply method, and that's what you're seeing here in this middle picture is a case coming around in which we are identifying the contents of that case and then putting that case label on. And we also support print on demand, which in some cases where you'll have a label print out and it just peels the liner back, so you take the label directly off the printer and put it onto the carton. Or the last one is sometimes it's just more convenient to do batch printing, and that may be where you're maybe it's a field harvest item and you're printing those labels in advance and sending them out to the field with the guys with some label applicators so that they can actually do that right in the field. One of the key benefits of packing is it gives you a real-time view into the packing operations, and it allows you to automate the receipt into the cooler, including printing your pallet tag and if you want a hybrid pallet tag. Another solution, and this is one that we just introduced, is myproduce.com. What's unique about myproduce.com is it is a web-based solution. So instead of having a server on site, we maintain that service in a secure off-site location. You simply need to have an internet connection. It works for growers of any size, and it has a couple different options in the feature set. You can get a traceability labeling only solution in which basically it's generating those case labels for customer labeling compliance, or you can get the full cycle business tool. And the full cycle business tool, one of the advantages of this product is that we took our 10 years of experience of creating the larger systems that are used by medium to large size companies, where we have about 100 plus deployments, and we took those key feature sets and we put them into myproduce.com. So when I say full cycle, I'm talking about everything from the receipt of either packed product or bulk goods, to the packing process, to the case labeling, to the put away process, to the order fulfillment process. And one of the advantages that we see is that with the systems that we provide, we have strong ROI, and so we have a lot of history in that with our traditional on-premise applications and knowing what those paybacks are, and I'll give you an example a little bit later in this presentation. We expect to see the same thing in myproduce.com, and the advantage of that is that while there is a cost for it on a monthly basis for your subscription, what we think you're going to see is to actually get benefits that far exceed the cost of that product. Again, it's a subscription-based system which minimizes your initial investment and allows you to really handle this as an operational cost as opposed to a capital cost. So let's turn our attention to the cooler operations for a moment and look at some of the challenges that we have there. So in cooler operations, you need to track cases to pallets. You need to track those products to their locations, including what pack line perhaps the product is on, which cold storage location, is it in a specific room, is it in a room with a specific row, or is there a rack location that perhaps that product either needs to be put away to or is in right now. One of the critical things for traceability is to actually track any changes to pallet contents. When you first created that pallet, maybe it was in the beginning of the run and you didn't have a full pallet quantity. Your pallet quantity is 50 and yet you got 38 boxes. Well, what you're probably going to do is you're going to run another lot and you're going to fill those 38 cases and add 12 more cases to get you to your full 50 pallet quantity, but now you've got 2 lot numbers on that pallet. It's critical for you to know those lot numbers and how many cartons of each lot number is on that pallet, so when you do ship it, that you have that information for traceability purposes. And then the other part is to track the product lots as they're fulfilled on sales orders and shipments, so you know exactly where each lot went to, so if there is any inquiry or any investigation going on, you can quickly identify where that lot number is, not only within your own facility, but where you may have shipped it to. So some of the traditional cooler challenges, probably the biggest one is product locations are left to what I call tribal knowledge. And what that means is while the forklift operators probably have a pretty good handle on where things are, if the key forklift operator or a couple of the forklift operators are not present someday, you have a real hard time finding it. A lot of this is because the locations are neither labeled nor tied to a grower accounting system. So you may just have a room and have in that room, 400 pallets and not know specifically where each one is. What that also leads to is then a less efficient use of warehouse space, because what happens typically is when you don't have an ability to track by location, you're kind of saying these 2 rows or these 3 sets of racks are going to be for this product, these next ones are going to be for another product, these other ones are going to be for yet another product. And that's all well and good when it's not peak season, but as we all know, in peak season when we have more items than we have locations to put them in, we have to get creative sometimes and store those in aisleways or in rooms that are typically not used for storage. That's when it becomes real critical to know where those locations are. The other big challenge is sales has limited visibility to available inventory. If you're not keeping track of your inventory in a real-time fashion, your sales group is somewhat hampered because they're making commitments for what they're going to be able to ship that day, and they need to do that with confidence because, as we know, there's not going to be a back order for your commodity, and if you're short too many times, that retailer or food service company is going to find someone who can reliably fill their orders, because when you're short, that means either a grocery store or a food service operator restaurant is also short of product. And ultimately, the lost product slows the process down. I've been in warehouses where I've seen people going through room after room looking for specific pallets that they want to ship on orders, and sometimes spending hours to find them. So the impact of those challenges is inconsistent put away leads to lost product, which ultimately leads to rotation issues, product waste in the form of scrapping or donations. Also, if you can't find the product, fulfillment slows down, and sometimes what winds up happening is that while you have the direct match product in-house, you wind up shipping a substitute because you can't find the right product. And probably the biggest risk to the business is inaccurate sales commitments lead to that customers, and as I mentioned, that happens too many times, you find yourself quickly no longer on that supplier list. The other impact is by delaying the trucks. You've got a truck, tied up at a dock door, you're going to get fewer shipments out or be working longer days. That's particularly important with more and more of the receivers requesting for specific commitments on dock door times for loading and how long it's going to take to load. That also has an impact on your business by increasing your overtime, delaying your shipments, and having products that are no longer sellable, which all decrease your profits. So our solution to those challenges is called Redline Cooler, and it again is part of our inventory and traceability suite. It tracks and manages pallets, cases, and bin locations. It also manages the accurate order fulfillment. So when you're going to fulfill an order, if you are in an order and it asks you, I'm picking line item 1, it asks you to scan that pallet ID to make sure it actually matches the order. If it doesn't, that pallet never moves, it doesn't get loaded into the truck, it simply says, that's the wrong one, here's where I want you to go, scan the pallet again until you get the right one. We also enable you to do physical inventories and cycle counts, and by doing this, in particularly in areas where you're doing a lot of less than full pallet quantities, it's a great way to keep track of what did you ship, and then doing your inventory at the end of the day, you can come back and say, wait, I'm off in that forward pick area, which means one of my orders either didn't get billed correctly or has not been invoiced. Let me investigate that. The system uses wireless handheld computers like what you see here, and that provides a real-time communication, which is critical because sometimes these orders are changing on the fly. There might be new additional notes, there may be additional quantities or subtractions of quantities that are important in the order fulfillment process. You don't want to be working off a pick list that was printed multiple hours prior. This system is fully integrated with Famous and several other systems as well, and it has very intuitive reporting, which gives you some valuable business intelligence and ideas of where you can fine-tune things within your operations. It's also integrated with the rest of our suite, which includes our field product for those field harvest and field packed items, as well as packing, which I talked about just a moment ago. So really, if we look at what Redline Cooler is, it's a produce inventory management solution. It has the inventory locator, it has directed activities such as directed putaways, directed picking, and directed shipping. And in those directed activities, what we're doing is we're actually telling the operator, go to this location to either put it away or to pull something. And in that process, we're always validating the order fulfillment, and we're validating all moves. If someone tries to move a pallet and scans a Coke can as their location, it's going to come back and say that's not a valid location. Again, as I mentioned, we're integrated with popular accounting systems, including Famous, and our system is intuitive, and the visual reporting, again, gives you great business intelligence. And the net at the end of the day is the cooler product really saves you money. You know, as I was talking about the business intelligence, one of the things that we spent a lot of time on in the last year was totally revising and updating all of our reports. We started by actually looking at our existing customers to understand which reports they use the most, and we asked them a lot of questions about how they use them. And as a result of that, we came up with the idea that we needed to revise our reporting to make it much more visual, and we're able to show you things. In this case, this is a activity by worker, so I can see color-coded different activities and how much each worker was doing. Other intelligence that we can provide is location availability, shipments by product, any truck inspections that were done. We can give you lot traceability, and we can also show you again that worker productivity. Really, this helps you stay ahead of the information curve, and information is power, and with that information you're able to make changes where needed in your business to fine-tune things. So now let's turn our attention to a few real-world success stories. The first one here is Kershaw Fruit. Kershaw Fruit is a member of the Domex Superfresh Growers Group. They are a grower shipper based in Yakima, Washington, shipping approximately 60,000 cartons a week. And their requirement when we met with them was to really improve product rotations. And once they implemented the system, the return on their investment became apparent within days, and they quickly realized the initial benefits they looked for: improved rotation and efficiencies. In fact, they improved their efficiency so much that within the first month of them implementing the system, they were able to do a 30% labor reduction in the shipping group that allowed them to basically say, look, this is what it cost us in excess labor when we did not have that system, and they were able to either redeploy those workers in other areas, or in some cases they were just taken off the payroll. And we had a great quote from their IT manager, Eric Skiles, who just basically said, you know, we have confidence our forklift drivers are getting the right pallets at the right time and improving the product rotation far beyond what they had expected. Another case study based out of Oxnard, California, is Deardorff Family Farms, who has been a very well-known and respected grower dating back to 1937. They were moving into a new facility to increase their storage capacity by 70%, and in doing so, they also needed to increase employee hours by only 20%. They had a paper-based location management system that was unreliable for them. They would print a pick list that kind of said, you know, weave your way through the warehouse and go here and go there and go here, and the problems were that things moved fast enough that that paper was often outdated. With Redline Cooler that they implemented, they track and measure employee performance and monitor their resource allocation, and as a result, they increased their inventory accuracy and improved their business processes. And we actually gave them a way to do treatment tracking on a hydrocool that allowed them to analyze the effectiveness and the utilization of those hydrocool machines to get the most out of them. And the quote from Scott Deardorff, Vice President over at Deardorff, was simply, fulfilling with the handheld devices instead of the pick tickets created an invaluable operational efficiency. Not only did they cut down on the paperwork, but they increased the accuracy for loading and have eliminated their misships. They operate at a whole new level of efficiency and save a lot of time and money. So a great testimonial from a very good customer. And going north of the border here, let's take a look at Eppolito Fruit and Produce. They're based out of Ontario, Canada, and they move millions of packages each year for the growing and shipping of fresh vegetables in over 200 different configurations. And they really needed an effective way to validate their order fulfillment and avoid shipping errors. They do a lot of cross-docking for other companies as well, and this was a key area that they needed to really drive their efficiency in. They needed to streamline time-consuming manual inventory counts and reconciliations, and their spreadsheet-based packaging inventory simply wasn't working for them. As a result, they had higher stock levels than they probably needed, and they also needed to make sure that the packing facility wasn't running out. They needed to have that constant supply. So I'll let you read the quotes here yourself. Basically, in a nutshell, they've achieved nearly 100% shipping accuracy and have realized significant time savings in both order fulfillment and their inventory processes. So, now what we're going to do is I'm going to dive into an example here, and it's based on a 10-user system, which is pretty average for us on the cooler side. And so what I did here is I put together, what are the costs for the 10 mobile devices, including hardware support, 3-year comprehensive, which just means, if the forklift driver drops the gun, runs over it, breaks the handle off, instead of buying a new one, you ship it back to us and we actually get that replaced. So I have all of the items here, including accessories, some of the staging, the software licenses, the annual support, installation, etc., that got us up to about $79,000. In this particular case, we installed a wireless network. That added another $18,000, getting to just under $100,000 total price tag on this one. If we look at this, and I apologize, it's a little bit of an eye chart, but we actually have an online savings calculator, and we encourage our prospects and customers to use this, where it allows you to put in some of your key metrics, such as your order data, how many orders per day, how many pallets per order, how many cases per pallet, etc. You enter your labor to say how many forklift operators and how many people are keying those shipment information in, how many hours they work a day, do they get benefits, what their hourly rate is, and then how many truck reloads do you have to do per month because of basically loading errors or picking errors, and how much product do you. And through this, what we're able to do is use our history to come back and actually calculate what those savings are going to be. So in that system that was for roughly $100,000, what you're seeing here is that the first year payback was about $132,000, which means the payback in this one was less than 9 months. And the other areas of savings that it identifies here is reduction of donation and waste from having better inventory control, reduction of the reload time, and in this particular case, a significant amount of chargebacks that they get on an annual basis from missed shipments. So the key here is that, that first year alone, the system paid for itself, but probably more important is over time, if you look at those savings, because the cost really was in the first year, and then you've got some annual support, but over a period of 3 years, that's saving, getting close to $500,000, and when you get up to 5 years, you're getting real close to $750,000. And really, the best way to look at that is once you've subtracted your cost out of year one and your annual support contracts, you're back to a place where you're significantly increasing the profitability of your business on a year-to-year basis. So with that, I think it's time, Adrian, to go ahead and open up for questions from the audience. So if you have a question, you haven't already typed it in, go to the question window and type that in, and Adrian, let me know what questions we have.
Okay, so we've got a question here. Have I internal I have internal traceability? Why do I need to do PTI case labels?
Boy, I wish I had $1 for every time somebody asked me that question over the last 7 or 8 years. The reality is it comes back to the concept of the supply chain, and I totally understand where you're coming from on this one. Most growers, particularly growers of leafy greens or field pack products, had a methodology for internal traceability. If you were able to identify a label on their case that they put on and gave them the code, they could tell you down to what day, what shift, etc., that the product had shipped on. The challenge is, though, is that information doesn't go through the whole supply chain. Frequently, when it gets to the distribution center, whether it's a food service distribution center or retail, what you're seeing is that those pallets are often getting broken down and there's not a full pallet quantity going to the store. So what happens is, as soon as that pallet gets broken down, all the information on the pallet tag gets lost, and now you've got the individual cases. By doing the case labeling, what's happening is you're creating a method for visibility of that product all the way through the supply chain. Even if somewhere in the middle there you had a broker who may have taken possession or simply sold the product, that case label stays on the product. So if there is a challenge, you know exactly what it is, and if there was a recall on that product and the information chain had been broken, once you know that, hey, I do buy from this supplier and these are the lot numbers that they're asking me to look at, you can actually look at the physical product on hand as well. So good question. Do we have any more, Adrian?
Excellent. Thanks for that, Todd. So I have one here. Can you also help with field data collection for QA info, testing, labor tracking?
So we do field data collection primarily related to the harvest and traceability. However, we do have partners who have systems that we work with that we can bring into the equation, who do things like labor tracking, spray record tracking, and also keep track of inspections. So definitely, if you have those needs, reach out to us, and your sales rep can either help you with it directly or put you in contact with one of our partners that has a solution that meets your needs.
Excellent. So we have another one here. What other accounting software does your cooler connect to?
So right now, the one that is in the marketplace and that we've got multiple installations of is Computech. Computech is a company based out of Wenatchee, Washington, and has a lot of strong customers, in particular in the Northwest, that are involved in apples, cherries, pears, and soft fruits. So we've got a number of installs with them, and then we have two others that are in discussion right now. They have not been consummated, but companies of grower accounting systems who recognize that the data collection part is not their area of expertise, and looking for us to help them integrate our products into them.
Excellent. So we have another one here. We ship about 20 trucks a day. How would my cost compare to the example you provided?
You know, going back to those costs, it really kind of comes down to, you know, and let me get back up to that. The cost here was here. You know, there's a lot of variables here. The things that come into play, and it really will just require a discussion, and that is, you know, how many mobile workers do we have? Of those mobile workers, you know, do I have Wi-Fi in my whole facility now, or do I need to install the wireless infrastructure? So, you know, I would say that the best thing we can do is we can go through some discussion with you to best analyze your particular site. And if you're not quite sure if it makes sense for you to do, you know, probably the first thing to do is to simply go to our cooler page and actually do that savings calculator and run it through with your own operations and see what that number is. You know, typically our systems of cooler, you know, are going to be in the 45 to, you know, 50,000 and above. And so if your number on that annual savings is anywhere close to that, the amount that you come up with there, we can then look at the cost and say, hey, you know, if it's above 50,000, that's probably a no-brainer. We should get in there and start looking at it, and we can help you fine-tune these numbers.
Excellent. So I have another one here. How does your system work in real time with inventory of packing materials received, keeping up with FIFO?
So for packaging materials, it really kind of depends on the system that you have. With the customers that we have that are using Famous, they basically receive those packing materials as a pallet of product, and then the same processes that we make sure that the produce itself gets handled in a FIFO way we use on those, meaning, you know, if you go to pull product, you can select a rule that says, I want to do my pull of this packaging material or of this product by FIFO so that you get the first in, first out. We have multiple rules there, including LIFO, because we have some customers in California who are shipping to the East Coast, and they say, look, I need to get my latest product in so that it makes that journey and arrives in really good shape on the other side.
Okay. So I have another one here. Does your packing system require a connection to my accounting system?
So the answer there is no, it doesn't. You know, if we have the integration with the accounting system, that's good, but you know, some of the customers that we have who have accounting systems have just elected to say, look, I'm going to give you the pack styles that I have, and we can simply import what those pack styles are for the items and simply do the labeling off of those. As far as the source lots go, that's another thing that if you are keeping track of that in your accounting system, we'll pull it out of there. If not, we've got other methods that you can use to input what are those bulk inventory items as you receive them so that we know what lot number is where so that we can pull it for the pack run when you're ready.
Excellent. So I have quite a long one here. I saw an article the other day that claimed produce caused majority of foodborne illnesses. How do the foodborne illness rates in meat compare to produce?
Interesting. You know, I saw an article, and I don't remember exactly where I saw it. It was online, and the heading was something like "Produce creates a majority of foodborne illnesses" or something. You know, as I read that, it kind of came back, and it was clear to me that the title, if it's the same article that this reader saw, was a little bit misleading, because as you got into it, it actually said, you know, you're twice as likely to get sick eating chicken as you are eating the produce. At the end of the day, the good news is that that is something that has actually been identified, and working in this area, what I've seen is that the combined level of foodborne illnesses across the protein products, so beef, poultry, chicken, is roughly about the same, 22%, as it is on the produce side. So I'd have to say that it's not true that you're seeing more foodborne illnesses from protein products. Again, you always are subject to the author and their research methodology, but mine is based on that Alliance of Food and Farming and some other resources.
Thank you for that. So
sure.
Next one, why hasn't the PTI been more widely adopted?
Boy, that is the million-dollar question that, in the PTI Leadership Council that we've talked multiple times, and really every time we get together twice a year. You know, really at the high level, what I would say is two things. You know, number one, I think that from the retail perspective, some of the retailers who endorsed the PTI and said that they supported it had not really understood the implications of the internal changes that they needed to make. So they have been making changes and are simply not ready yet to roll them out. There's another class of retailer who is kind of been in the category of saying, we're just going to wait and see what FSMA says, even though Mike Taylor, the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, has said on numerous times that if you're doing the PTI, you're going to meet the traceability requirements. There's a whole level of food safety that's required on top of that as well. But the reality is that, again, PTI was a voluntary adoption, and what we've seen is that, you know, retailers are working on thin margins, and a lot of them have just not moved forward in that area. Fortunately or unfortunately for them, their hand will be forced soon enough by FSMA and or Safe Food for Canadians Act. The bigger issue I always ask the retailers is, wow, does that mean you've got a big fund for a big legal fund that you're putting money into? Because as we've seen in the Jensen Farms and some of the other ones that have gone on, is that when there is a large-scale foodborne illness outbreak, there are lawyers who specifically target this area and will do class action lawsuits. And typically you're looking at minimum seven-figure payouts when those types of events occur. So I think it really at this point comes down to they're determining their risk tolerance and deciding that they're able to pay those benefits if they come out, and they're weighing that against their own internal systems and the cost for them and the timing for them to deploy them. I will say from the group of retailers that are involved on the PTI Leadership Council that they have been saying all along that we're working on this. This is something that we're doing. A lot of them have systems that have been in place for easy to go in and change that code, but they've been working on it, and they certainly will be there in time for compliance for FSMA.
Okay, so thank you for that, Todd. We have another one here. Can one system be integrated into multiple facilities?
Yeah, so I think to the degree, let me talk about that for a second. So on our on-premise site, like cooler and packing, we do have customers who are implementing those across multiple facilities. We do have the concept of location. So if you're, take the cooler example, if you're in a location that is in McAllen, Texas, and you've got another location that is in Swedesboro, New Jersey, you can have those set up as separate warehouses, and the logins for the workers at one don't allow them to see what's going on for workers at another. We even have the capability that if you have a supervisor or a manager that travels between facilities, they can have access to both facilities. On the My Produce side, what's kind of interesting is because it's web-based, we're getting a lot of interest from people who are either importing products or have production facilities where they don't have automated process tracking now, because it will allow them to create those records, and really it doesn't matter whether the packing occurred in Peru or in Pahrump, they all come together. So very much am focused on the ability to have you manage your system from one or more locations.
Okay, and we're running just kind of close to time, but maybe we could address this last question. Redline software, how does it help with food safety certification?
So for food safety certification, I guess I need to draw that line again in that on the food safety side, we're not actually in the food safety business per se. We're in the inventory and traceability side. So while we have partners who do food safety and that we can connect you with who can help you on either consulting to design your HACCP and HARPC documents and put those systems in place, we have partners who will keep track of the inspection information and feed that information in as needed. But really, we're in the inventory and traceability side of the business, which means we'll let you know where it is and where it went and how it got there. The food safety element is something that is done by our partners.